And it is an honor and a pleasure to have you with us, Captain Kutryk. I know you've been in touch with COPA. You've you've had the Neil J. Armstrong Scholarship with us. You're very into aviation. It's a pleasure for you to be with us. And I think we got in touch with you a little while ago, and I did invite, I'm seeing they're not with us, and there's this thing with the RCAF we invited Pierre Ruel and Francis Mercier, two ex-F-18 pilots.
Yeah,
and there's
sure.
something with what the older guys are saying, nope, we leave the younger guys on their own. We don't play the mother-in-law. We never show up on these things. So they respectfully declined to be on this call. And I was thinking, no, come on, guys. No, we can't do this. We'll let the younger guys do that. So apparently it's something like a respectful protocol of some type, right? To let the younger people just say what they have on their minds without these older guys being there.
That's interesting you say that. I did not know that, but I know both those gentlemen well. So
you do? Okay.
Oh yeah. So we've never worked together. Their careers were slightly offset with mine, but I've been in touch with them since they've retired, and that's funny. Okay.
And they're both with transport, and
yes.
Laura will get to work with them. I was working with them also. At transport, and Pierre Ruel and Francis Mercier are both, these two guys are wonderful people. And I said, guys, you should be with us this evening. They said, no, we would love to be, but we declined because of blah, 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 blah. Because Pierre Ruel was also I think he was the base command for Baketville many years ago.
Yeah, so it was Pierre Ruel who put me back in touch with COPA after I ended up out in Baketville. And my previous commanding officer was a neighbor just a few doors down from Pierre in Ottawa. So the connections all got made, and it's a small world.
And that's why you're with us this evening. So I don't want to pursue this too much, but they're not with us. But you are with us. I'm glad you are. Thank you. And I think just to get back to the questions, because I think we can fill up this hour pretty much, and we'll get more questions as we move on. You did get the questions, or some of the questions ahead of time, did you not?
I got a few questions by email from Ms. Nagel, but by no means do we have to limit it to that.
Okay.
So yeah, it's all good.
Right now, where are you sitting? Where are you right now?
I'm in Cold Lake right now. So I'm sitting in my house in Cold Lake, Alberta.
So you're right next to you on my screen. There's Rob, who's in Alberta right now.
Okay.
I'm jealous of Rob, who's got this beautiful skyline. So you've probably got the same skyline that he's got. Yeah,
it looked like that a few hours ago. There's some cloud in Cold Lake now. I'm hazarding a guess. Rob, are you south near Calgary, or is that Edmonton area?
Rob, you're muted. We can't hear you, Rob.
Okay, I'm in Sylvan Lake.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right in the middle, smack in the middle of the province. Well, looks like nice weather.
Good. Oh. Okay. So Captain Kutryk, let's start with the first one. What is your workout regime? How many times per week, length of workout, cardio, weight training, etc., to be able to handle the demands of the aircraft you operate? Also, in the photograph, you look tall. I was always under the impression that an F-18 pilot had to be a shorter individual, and that's from Earl Penner. And I think Earl is from Manitoba. He's not on the call right now, but I think he's from Manitoba. That's his question. I know because I've met and I've chatted and had lunch with Chris Hadfield and all that. Chris is fairly tall, but let's hear what you've got to say about this. But the workout regime, how tall you are, and what you've got to do. What do you do?
Sure. So somewhat of a humble, self-conscious start, bragging about my workout regime, but nonetheless, we'll dive right into it. So two parts of that question: the fitness side, and then the actual height side for the types of aircraft I'm involved with. I have to begin by saying my workout regime is probably tailored more for some of my own personal fitness goals then the specific requirements of flying the F-18 and flying the CT-155 Hawk aircraft. And then I'll give a little bit of some amplifying information on that in a second. So Mr. Penner's asking, I enjoy some, endurance sports. I run about 15 kilometers a day, try to do 5 to 6 days a week of that. And then 4 to 5 days.
You said 15 kilometers?
Yes, 15, not 50.
But still 15 a day?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
But like I said, that's not, I don't want to create the false impression here. This is not an Air Force requirement that has to do with some of my personal fitness goals, training for the Toronto Marathon this fall. Hopefully it's not canceled with COVID and everything else. And then on the gym side for strength, 4 to 5 days a week in the gym, focusing on weights and muscular strength. As far as the fitness requirements for the job I do, it's essentially a balance that's required between, cardiovascular strength. Your heart has to be healthy and strong enough to support your body under stress with, there's temperature stress, there's G stress in that single seat cockpit environment. There is a strength component on the other side of that coin though, and that comes with the G. So you require the muscular strength to execute the anti-G straining maneuver, flexing your muscles and breathing in a certain way to keep the blood in your head while you're under stress and under the G strain. I work with a lot of pilots. Some of those pilots have workout regimes that focus a lot more on strength. Some of my colleagues have other regimes that focus a lot more on cardio endurance. So there is a balance necessary for the job, but by no means think that what I described on my own account is something that is required to fly jets.
So you yourself do, you've got your own level and you've set your own goals, right? Which are probably, they're above what the RCAF requires.
Sure. Yeah, perhaps. I'd like to stay somewhat, modest here, but yes, fair enough. The fitness side here certainly has relevance though for the job. So fitness has a direct link to health, and the medical category required for single seat ejection seat pilots in the RCAF is quite high. We have to do a medical annually, once a year. That annual medical is very thorough, and there's good reason for that. We're operating in a high altitude, sometimes pressure breathing environment, high G, high stress, training for combat and tactics, and sometimes actually executing those tactics and operations in combat. So the health requirements are quite high, and fitness is part of that. And I've talked to some other people about the health standards and why they are the way they are, but you quickly realize if you were to do an analogy of driving a car, now certainly there's risk with driving a car at any time. If there is a medical complication for you driving a car by yourself, there is risk there, but you could decelerate possibly in a controlled manner, pull over to the side of the road, and minimize that risk. On the single seat high performance aircraft side of that discussion, you're on your own. There's no co-pilot, and you're often, like I said, at high altitude or somewhat strenuous and possibly a high risk regime. So,
Okay.
so that's the first half of the question. I'll talk about the height thing for a second too. This comes up quite sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, before you get, there's a segue to another question, and then you can get to the height. So how do you build up a G tolerance? Is that training that you do 15K a day, which is amazing? Does that build up your G tolerance? And that's a question from Thomas Farapopov that's with us today.
Yeah, so good segue.
And then you get back to your height.
Sure. So the G tolerance situation, there's a whole bunch of different things coming together, contributing to G tolerance, which is to say staying conscious while your body experiences G forces. And I imagine most of your COPA members being involved with aviation have somewhat of an understanding of what I'm talking about. When you maneuver an aircraft, you experience a force, and that force is greater than the strength of gravity, and that is the measurement of G. So if you're pulling perhaps 6 or 7 G, the force you feel on your body is 6 or 7 times the weight of 1 G, which I'm feeling right now sitting in this chair. As the performance level of the aircrafts increase, the G capability increases as well. So to manage that situation and that G stress, it starts right in pilot training. And there's a few things. There's an internal component, so a physiological component, and then there is an external component as well. The external component is the G pants. They're referred to sometimes as the G suit or G pants. They're green colored pants that kind of resemble cowboy chaps, for lack of a better term, that we wear over top of our flight suit. They have bladders inside, and then the pants themselves plug into the aircraft. So there's a hose coming off the garment, the device plugs into the aircraft, and then as you pull G and the aircraft understands the levels of G increasing, the aircraft will push more air into your G pants. They inflate, you feel it, it's very obvious. Under high G, that's actually quite abrupt at times. And what that's doing is squeezing the tissue, the muscles in your legs, and by squeezing that tissue and muscle, it's forcing it away from your legs and your extremities, because ideally you want that in your head. The problem, obviously, if you don't address this G situation, is you do not have enough blood in your head. Vision deteriorates initially, and then you will fully lose consciousness, referred to as G lock, G-induced loss of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So the G pants help, but that's not the end of the story. The other side, and what I would suggest is the more important side, is the physiological response and technique of the pilot as they enter these regimes. So this goes right back to pilot training. When a student pilot is being introduced, I got my wings through an exchange program with the United States Air Force in Wichita Falls, Texas, flying the T-38. And after our first few flights on the T-38, and indeed for the entire syllabus, my instructor would review my HUD tapes and listen to my breathing and my straining on the audio of the HUD tapes. And if I was not straining properly, that was a very big deal. There were some students who actually failed flights for not doing the AGSM properly, which is the anti-G straining maneuver.
Okay.
Now what that maneuver is a coordinated effort of squeezing certain muscles in your legs, in your abdomen, and in your chest, and coupling the flexing of those muscles with a very unique breathing pattern. So you're squeezing muscles, trying to force the blood out of your legs, out of your lower abdomen to keep the pressure to your head high enough. And you're coupling that with a unique kind of abbreviated breathing pattern to maintain consciousness. And as you go through training and you do this AGSM every time you experience G, you become very good at it. And it, in fact, becomes second nature. So much so that once you're operational, like on the F-18, for example, you're pulling a lot of G, sometimes with a very rapid onset. And that high G, you're staying conscious throughout. And that AGSM is totally second nature, because now in that F-18, you're focused on maintaining your visual contact with other aircraft, working the weapon system on your aircraft, executing the tactics within your aircraft. So the AGSM is certainly critical, but secondary to the tactical work that you're doing inside the jet.
Excellent. So we'll get back to the height factor on the F-18, but would you actually do AGSM with a high angle bank on a Citabria? Because it's so you're just, or a 172 and you'd be turning, high bank angle, or would you, would you be going or doing stuff like that?
I don't know. I haven't been in that situation to really explore that since going through the F-18 training. What I can say is it is proportional to the amount of G you're pulling, obviously. And I think a lot of the people in this chat and a lot of COPA members understand, but for some people that may not, G is certainly not aircraft dependent. People think you need a fighter jet with afterburners to get a lot of G, and that's not the case. Just to do the physics, if you're doing a 60-degree level turn, 60 degrees of bank, doesn't matter what type of aircraft you're in, you are pulling 2G to maintain level. That's just how the physics work. Now on the F-18 side, the G limit of the F-18 is regulated by the computers. It depends on what you have on the wings, how much fuel's on board, so on and so forth. But the round number, kind of all things being equal, is about 7.5. If you're lightweight, you can get more than 7.5. If you're heavyweight, you will not be able to get 7.5. The computers won't let you. But for rapid onset to 5, 6, 7G, that's pretty heavy. And the comparison of that is, well, just imagine your body weight. Okay, now times that by 7. Now find a sack of potatoes or rice that weighs that number, your weight times 7, and stick it on your chest. Like that's a lot of weight.
Yeah, it is.
But at the same time, I'm just trying to think, some of the propeller airshow performers, even like you said, a Citabria or something, you can certainly get, 3, 4, 5G. I'm not an expert on the Citabria, but I know those guys are pulling high G, and I know the guys that are performing professionally in an aircraft like a Citabria, they're straining to maintain, good physiology while they're executing that maneuver.
So we know you're in top shape. You're in top physical shape. Just the fact that you're going 15 kilometers a day is like, okay, my goodness.
I don't want to go too far down that road. Thank you very much. I'll say this. So I work with some guys that are in much, much better shape than I am.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, like some long distance athletes, and I was a diver with the Navy before I was a pilot, and some of the guys involved.
Get to that.
Like those guys were just machines.
I will get to that because I've got those questions for you, but let's get through the questions that we've got, if you don't mind, about the height. How tall are you? Okay. And the original question that we got, which was, you look tall. I was always under the impression that an F-18 pilot had to be a shorter individual, from Mr. Penner. So what? Yeah.
Sure, Mr. Penner. My height is 6 feet. That's what it says on the driver's license, and I kind of measure right to the line there. So kind of somewhat standard, I guess, in my profession. I work with some people that are shorter than me, some substantially shorter. I also work with pilots flying the same aircraft who are taller than me. There is no specific height restriction, which is to say there's no distance to measure from the bottom of your heel to the top of the head that's going to limit you from an aircraft in the RCAF. Now, of course, there are limitations because there's a geometry to a cockpit, and if you don't fit in the cockpit because you're either too big or not big enough, there's going to be a problem. But the way the Air Force manages this is an assessment when you first enroll called Aircrew Selection, where they do all kinds of assessments, but one component is where they measure you up, essentially. It's an anthropometric measuring system at the RDC in Toronto. It may have evolved, but when I did it, you end up standing in a kind of strange phone booth looking contraption. You're not wearing anything except your underwear. And then they do a 3D scan of your body. The computer then automatically takes that scan and measures all the distance between your joints and your proportions, essentially. That data, those numbers, are then applied to these templates. And then after the whole process, you actually get a piece of paper with all the aircraft in the Air Force. And if you're outside the limits for any aircraft, it'll be yellow or possibly red. So I did that. And for the jets that I fly, they're looking at things like, from my hip to the top of my head. For canopy clearance, they're looking from my hips to my knees. For ejection seat clearance, if required. Shoulders to then the fingertips to be able to reach the controls and stuff. But the envelope for that different height and different proportions is somewhat broad. Both the Hawk and the Hornet have seats that you can raise or lower electronically. Pedals you can push away and pull forward. So if anyone's thinking about a job in the Air Force, do not be discouraged by any kind of height component by any means.
Okay, so whether it's you can in the low 5 feet to 6 and above, right?
Sure.
Below, if you're not 8 feet tall, then you're pretty much okay.
Yeah, and if you are 8 feet tall, you may be too tall for the Hawk, but I'm pretty sure you could fly the C-17 or the C-130 or some really other awesome aircraft in the Air Force.
Okay, good. So there's a lot. I mean, the amplitude is pretty big for what we can do. Okay, good. Next question, your nickname, Glib. And what is your call sign and how did you get that? That's from Adam Targi.
Perfect. I see Adam on the chat, but I don't see video. Did he log in?
Yeah, Adam is there. There's Adam. Yeah.
Oh, there he is. Hey, man. Awesome. Good. So right into the call sign question. This is a crowd favorite, and there's some interesting stories and often disappointing answers at the end, but I'll dive right in. So a bit of a background, the nicknames that you see painted on the sides of fighter jets and used within the fighter community represent a very long-standing tradition. That's interesting because it's not limited to Canada, and it's certainly not limited to the Air Force either. So US Navy, US Marines, Marine fighter pilots, and really any country, regardless of which continent, or even which side that country was on in historical conflicts, has some kind of tradition with nicknames, call signs, nom de guerre, essentially associated with their respective fighter pilot culture. Now, how a pilot gets a call sign depends. It's usually somewhat disparaging, related to an embarrassing story, an unflattering experience, or a mistake, or just some simply unflattering characteristic. There's really only two rules when it comes to call signs. One, if you actually like your call sign and you think it's pretty cool, then it's going to get changed because that's not allowed. And the second rule is if you have a call sign and you take that call sign operationally, so if you fly with that call sign in combat, then that call sign is written in stone essentially, and it cannot change. But prior to combat experience, any pilot who makes a new mistake or does something else worthy of a call sign is liable to have their call sign upgraded and changed. As far as call signs, and certainly within Canada's fighter force, most pilots tend to play those cards pretty close to their chest. The call signs do get painted on the sides of jets, but the stories behind them often don't get shared in full detail. One thing I'll share with you somewhat humorously, if a fighter pilot is willing and openly wants to explain the story behind their call sign, they're lying, because that story they're going to share is not true. My call sign, Glib, does have somewhat of a bit of a interesting backstory. I've certainly been accused of having a dry or glib sense of humor and approach to certain situations. But beyond that, glib, like many call signs in usage, actually comes from an aviation-related term. So back in the Vietnam era, there was a maneuver called the glib maneuver, colloquially called get low and burner, but it was a low-level missile defense maneuver used by the aircraft, in the Vietnam era, essentially. That tactic and maneuver is no longer valid, but the term is still quite common. My call sign didn't get a lot of attention until 2017 with the Canada 150 in the demo. So I wasn't offering a ton of information, but social media kind of started bouncing a bunch of ideas around, and it was absolutely hilarious to me because a lot of people started suggesting acronyms, got lost in Baghdad, got lost in Baggetville. There was a good one. Good luck, I'm blind, and blind is the code word for losing visual awareness on the other friendly fighter aircraft. So stuff like that. The one that really got me laughing though was it was towards the end of July 2017. My brother, I know Mr. Gervais, you're probably aware, ended up getting selected by the Canadian Space Agency. Yes. And that was announced on Canada Day of 2017. Mm-hmm. So someone on social media, they're like, oh, we know what GLIB stands for. It stands for good looking inferior brother. Now, that made me laugh, and the inside jokes continue to this very day about the underachieving younger brother of Josh Kutryk. But the thing that really gave that momentum was some of my public affairs support personnel within the Air Force, essentially encouraging that and kind of replying to some of those tweets and kind of, pushing that conversation further. So that it kind of exploded. And to this very day, I get a chuckle out of good looking inferior brother. Now that's not the original story behind the call sign, but that's a bit of history of, what call signs are and how they end up on jets. And we'll probably leave it there. Sorry, I'm not going to go into.
You won't go into more details. Okay, all right.
Well, I would like, in full disclosure, I would love to give you a great story, but I'd be somewhat dishonest because that story wouldn't be true. And then pretending it's true is possibly not the most morally.
So, Adam, it's got to be, it will be around the beer just between both of you.
That's exactly it.
You'll get the real story then. Okay. I've also got a bunch of questions on, because you guys are so impressive in what you're doing. And you start from either, you've been a cadet, you were a cadet, you just moved up, you got your glider license, you got your powered flight license. I was in touch just a few weeks ago with Major Toth, who takes care of all the cadet program. And unfortunately this year, the cadet program, there will be no lessons and no one will be flying this summer. So we may be preventing some of the future pilots like you from moving on. I think cadets are great for what they can instill in some of the younger people's heads, making sure that they can go out there and be pilots. The Neil J. Armstrong and Neil Armstrong Scholarship that you got, and your brother also received in 2000, you were in 2003. All these things just make the aviation world in Canada just better, and then we're just contributing to that. And people like you're contributing to this. So I'm just glad you're on. So I'll continue with some other questions. Have you had any close calls or lessons you learned the hard way? Maybe glib stems from that. Who knows? But what about close calls or lessons from the hard?
Yeah. So just thinking on the fly here of some experiences, and I'll try and caveat this with some details and some background information, essentially, because someone's like, have you ever had a malfunction on the CF-18? And then if you answer with one or two sentences without the background, then it's like, oh my God, that sounds incredibly dangerous. And that's like a really wild story, when the reality wasn't that case. The airplanes we operate are very complex, and the very nature of military aviation involves risk and managing that risk. In fact, that's, everything we do, kind of, if you were to visualize that as a conceptual pyramid, the foundation of that pyramid is risk management. So that is that's the basis of everything we do. Just as far as experiences, I don't like the term close call, because it has some connotations that might not be somewhat accurate, but two experiences in the F-18 that really got my heart pumping. The first one was on a training mission when I was out in Bagotville. And so we're just conducting, it was a ACN, Air Combat Maneuver training. So there's myself, there's one other F-18, and then the enemy aircraft we're working with is a contracted Alpha jet. And everything is going somewhat smoothly. In the middle of one of these training sets, one of these air combat maneuvering sets, I experienced a hydraulic problem. Now the F-18 is a very robust aircraft. It's, no kidding, designed for combat. So there's all kinds of redundancy and stuff like that. My hydraulic problem results in a procedure and a checklist, and I'm going through that procedure, so I have to shut an engine down. As I'm going through that procedure, there is a somewhat unrelated issue with my flight controls, which means that I don't have my flaps anymore. I'm not able to lower flaps. Again, not a huge deal. The F-18 has two hydraulic systems, so I've got one system still. I don't need my flaps to land. I like them because it means I'm a little slower when I'm going towards the ground, but not critical. But then the third thing that was, again, somewhat unrelated was I was unable to dump fuel. So the aircraft's quite heavy with a full load of fuel. We're about halfway through the mission, so I had quite a bit of fuel on board still. Now I'm landing without flaps and with a single engine, single hydraulic scenario. So I want to get as light as I can. So there are certain scenarios and very specific locations that we can coordinate to dump fuel, to lighten weight in an emergency. The fuel dumping system on the aircraft was not working, so I'm unable to get that fuel dumped at all. So I have three somewhat unrelated things really conspiring to put me in a challenging spot. We start flying back towards the base in Bagotville. My wingman forms up on me, so we're now flying very close together. He's providing support with the checklist and doing a visual inspection of my aircraft. He could see that the hydraulic system on the one side indeed had a catastrophic failure. The side of the aircraft was wet with hydraulic fluid where the failure had occurred. And then we started assessing options. So I could fly around long enough to burn the gas to a lighter weight to safely land. Or I could assess the risk of landing at a higher speed than normal and manage that risk accordingly. Now I had lost one hydraulic system and I had lost one engine, so I had no interest in staying in the air longer than I had to. However, with my weight and unable to lower that weight by dumping fuel, I would be touching down, engaging the arresting cable and my wheel limitation speeds just above the max speed allowed. So we ran through a whole bunch of scenarios, assessed the risk, managed it, and then I elected to land fast and heavy. While this is going on, we're getting support from the maintenance guys on the ground via radio. My squadron's providing support via our operations desk on the radio, and it all worked out in the end. That's just a story that I share with some junior students that I train, because it shows how one very benign malfunction that really would be no big deal, when compounded by other factors, can be somewhat significant. And then how you approach that now significant scenario to manage the risk accordingly. The other story I'll share just very briefly happened overseas on operations. It's going to be a little more vague. Understand, with operational security, I can't talk about specific locations and times and stuff of some of the missions. But we were on a mission in Iraq. This is late December 2014. My wingman and I had a tasking, and it's a night mission. We're looking for movement of a new weapon system that intelligence suggested that the ISIS forces were moving into the area. The area of operation, the AO we were working, was dead. There was no light. It was just that pitch black kind of night. No vehicles moving around on the ground. No cultural lighting from street lamps or anything. It was the dark desert, and it was one of those missions where you think, we're gonna fly our vulnerability period for several hours. We're gonna fly back home with all of our weapons still on board, and it'll be an uneventful mission. Towards the end of that seemingly uneventful mission, something very surprising, something very eventful happened in my cockpit. So like I said, there'd been several hours just staring at the blackness of the ground, looking for a weapon system. So that's in the back of your mind, like there might be something down there that could be a threat. When my cockpit, as far as air pressure and light and just stimulus, explodes, for lack of a better term. So we're on night vision goggles. I feel the pressure in the cockpit drop. So it depressurizes, then repressurizes right away. So you feel that in your ears and just in your face. And then all the emergency lights come on. Now that's normally alarming enough, but on night vision goggles, your cockpit is very dark to maximize the performance of those goggles. So when all these lights come on, my night vision goggles get washed out. I actually have to take them off to see what's going on in my cockpit. My landing gear handle's going off. I'm getting audio tones that make no sense with what I'm seeing. I'm getting master cautions that don't line up with what some of my gauges are indicating.
Wow.
And so the first thing I think is, something serious happened. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking about that weapon system you were looking for. My heart did increase its beats per minute for a few seconds there. I immediately call my wingman. He was in my flight lead position at the time. I asked for the TAC lead, which means that I'm now going to be able to fly take care of my own aircraft and not have to worry about maintaining visual awareness on the other F-18 or anything else. And as we go through the checklist, what had happened, in fact, was a complete air data computer failure. So the F-18 is a fly-by-wire computer. All the instrumentation from the pitot-static system goes through a computer. The flight controls go through another computer and pull that from the ADC computer. And with that air data computer failure, the jet didn't know if it was on the ground, in the air, how fast it was going, where it was going, anything. So I get the gear warning because it thinks I'm low and I'm going to land. I'm getting all kinds of warnings because it thinks I'm standing still with no airspeed. Every warning I could get went off. You are able to fly the jet with that computer offline. It's not as maneuverable and it's a little finicky, but with my flight lead, we were able to get back out of northern Iraq, down south, back towards Kuwait and back safely. That example I share sometimes because it highlights, again, the air data computer isn't a huge deal. It's a fly-by-wire aircraft with tons of backups and redundancies. In daytime, VFR conditions, it would be no big deal at all. Nighttime on night vision goggles, a little bit of a bigger deal. But now you're in northern Iraq with no friendly locations to land if you have to land right away. I'm trying to limp back towards Baghdad. Baghdad was a friendly location, but it was not an ideal location. I did not want to go into Baghdad if I did not have to. And we were successfully able to get back to Kuwait. So my imagination kind of went to the worst case scenario when it first happened, but the result was not that significant.
So for that case, did you actually, did anything come back on before you landed, or did you actually land this, did you hand land this, the F-18?
Yeah, so without getting too complex, yeah, no, it's a fair question. So the air data computer never did come back online. Okay. You can go into the jet and tell the flight control computers, hey, this air data computer is bad news, don't listen to it, and force it to listen to direct inputs from the pitot-static. It also relates to the inertial navigation unit that I have on board. So I don't have the same symbology in the HUD, so on and so forth. But once we had properly determined the cause, it really wasn't that big of a deal at all.
Because I've been told, and I'm speaking not as COPA, but as Bernard and all this, like if you lose your computer on a fighter jet, you might as well eject. I've been told.
Yeah, so that's, as a generalization,
yeah, you'll just crash, and that's it. It's unstable.
I understand where you're coming from. Just for a little, clarification on some details. So the F-18 does not have one computer. It's got a series of computers. And for the flight control system, it is a fly-by-wire aircraft. Like if you look at an F-18 and like it's not a glider. You push a glider off a cliff, it's going to get some speed and it'll have some kind of aerodynamic performance. If you push an F-18 off something like it's not going to glide and you're not going to have any kind of aerodynamic control. There are two flight control computers on the F-18. So if you have one failure, you have the other one to back it up. Now, if everything went offline, if you have a fly-by-wire system and all your computers, like multiple computers, are all turned off or powered off, then you would likely be an ejection scenario. But losing one of those computers is not that big of a deal. And just to kind of elaborate on that, it is interesting. The F-18 was my first fly-by-wire machine. Okay. So the T-38 did not have a flight control computer, nor any of the other airplanes I've flown up to that point. And in the F-18, it's an amazing piece of engineering. So sometimes you'll be flying in tight formation, straight and level in very unstable air or turning or whatnot. And in tight formation, if you look over at your wingman or your flight leads, the stabilators, their fins, your aircraft is perfectly stable and smooth. His or her aircraft is perfectly stable and smooth, but those control surfaces are just going crazy. And that's the computer doing what it has to do to give the pilot what the pilot is asking. Likewise, when I move the stick to the right or the left, in a certain regime, my ailerons and my flaps as well and my stabilators are going to do certain things. In a different regime, if I move that stick the exact same way, the flight controls are going to do something totally different. because the computer knows the pilot wants this to happen. Because of the airspeed and angle of attack, I actually have to do different movements to get that same effect.
We'll make it happen, but it's going to take different inputs or different, yeah, okay.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. So you've had, well, I wouldn't have wanted to be in your shoes or your seat at northern Iraq at that night, dark night and all that. And Pierre did tell us a story about something like a telephone pole was moving towards his F-18 about 6 months ago, or close to a year ago, when he was in Kosovo.
Yes, sure.
Back in those days. Okay, let's get back to some other questions, because I've got a few even more than just the email. How many hours per month do you get to fly the F-18?
Sure. So that depends.
That's Clark Morowitz, who's not with us, by the way. But, Clark,
fair enough.
Yeah.
So it's quite a spectrum. On average, an operational F-18 pilot has between about 175 to 200 hours a year. And that's what I experienced on the F-18. Now I get much less on the F-18 because my full-time job is an instructor pilot on the Hawk aircraft. So I'm kind of a part-time F-18 pilot. When I was going through some training, you'd finish one course, there might be a pause before the next course. You might get less than 160 hours a year, slower years. When you deploy operationally, you tend to fly more. So, I spent three months flying in Iraq, and I got over 120 hours in those 3 months. So that was very busy. My best year, ironically, I was very surprised it worked out this way, was 2017 when I was doing the demo for Canada 150.
Yeah.
I got just over 300 hours that year, which was the high hour mark for any F-18 pilot in Bagotville at 3-wing that year.
And Captain Kutryk, what's in your logbook when you see F-18? What do you write? What does it say? Like I fly them all, or let's say a 172, it says C-172. What's an F-18?
Sure. So that's exactly it. It's Charlie Fox 18.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the convention that everyone uses. If you go to the actual, I guess it's the legal designation for the Canadian variant.
ICAO or something, or Canadian, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's Charlie Fox 188. So there's actually 2 8s in the fine print, but conventionally it's just CF 18.
Okay. All right. And not many people have that in their logbooks.
There's a few.
Just a few. When I was speaking with Chris Hadfield, someone said, "What do you do with the space station?" Well, yeah, it's S something. It's like, okay, like maybe 15 or 20 people have that. Someone like the CF-18, it's maybe 100 people, whatever. But still, okay, you're in a class of your own. So you do fly about 150 or 200 hours a year would be the which you fly typically. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Next question we've got. In regard to the crash of the F-18 in Lethbridge a few years ago, why were you taking such a risk by flying at that speed and attitude when the chance of a compressor stall was very high, and particularly why do this demonstration so close to the ground that when things start to go wrong, there's no way to recover? That's from Leigh Schubert.
Okay. Sure. So Lethbridge, 2010. I was not flying the F-18 at that time. When we start talking about aircraft incidents, it's important to be very accurate. And
if you don't want to answer, we're fine with that.
No, not at all. But the vocabulary is certainly relevant and important. So the question referenced a compressor stall. To be specific, a compressor stall was not the cause of that incident. There was no sign of compressor stall whatsoever. It had nothing to do with the incident. So the incident had to do with the MFC, which was the main fuel control. And that would be the right engine in Lethbridge. I'm just thinking from the photos because you could see the aircraft is rolling to the right. So there's a boost piston mechanical system, essentially the fuel control for each engine, the fuel flow control. And there was a mechanical failure on the right side. What that meant or resulted in was the right engine essentially having idle thrust when the pilot selected afterburners on both engines. So it was a mechanical failure. It was not a compressor stall at all. The CF-18 is actually very robust when it comes to compressor stall scenarios. Compressor stalls are often caused by disrupted airflow into the air intake when you look at kind of the physics of how a jet engine works. The F-18 is a high alpha fighter, high angle of attack. So, I'll do test flights where I'll get 45, 50, beyond 50, 60 degrees angle of attack momentarily, which means that the air hitting the aircraft is 60 degrees. Like that's pretty steep. And the engines hack that just fine. What was the result of Lethbridge? Well, after the investigation determined the cause, there were two things, and I'm aware of this because of my involvement with the demo 7 years later. That MFC, main fuel control mechanical system, that component was identified and removed from the fleet. It was upgraded with a different system that would not be able to fail in the way that one failed in Lethbridge. The other change pertaining to the demo was that high alpha pass, where that incident occurred, was changed. So they were flying it at 300 feet, and it was not only because of Lethbridge. The demo, just as a bit of a side note, is always kind of evolving. One of the evolutions over those years was that high alpha pass going to 500 feet. So the cause was a mechanical failure. It was identified, and that component was not fixed. It was replaced throughout the entire fleet. The last thing I'd like to say about Lethbridge is it is an example of risk management through the demo and through military aviation. So there was a critical component failure, and the pilot did end up ejecting. But these demonstration performances have a whole bunch of restrictions on what we're able to do as we manage that risk. One of those restrictions is energy directed at the crowd. So if I want to fly over the crowd during a demonstration routine or towards the crowd at any point, I have to be at a certain altitude, which is say high enough, and I have to be at a certain energy state to minimize that risk to the crowd to absolutely zero. And that's what happened in Lethbridge. So that pass is being executed. It's being executed a certain distance from the show line. Now, it did happen during a practice, but the show line and restrictions still stood. And it was happening in a scenario where if anything were to go wrong, the worst case scenario, which would be the ejection in that instance, would not be risking the safety of the spectators. So that's what happened in Lethbridge.
Which brings us to the other question, which is there, and I'll read it, and then I'll ask you, I think, in other terms, in regards to the recent tragic crash of the Tudor and Kamloops, is there any good reason why they didn't eject as the plane was approaching the maximum altitude and stall speed rather than wait till it stalled and spun? Even after the spin, wasn't there still some chance of regaining wings level flight for long enough to eject with some reasonable chance of survival? It seems that to me that there were two opportunities that were wasted. What am I missing? Leigh Schubert. I'll rephrase the question, and I think you just hinted at this, is what I think it's important for us to know what's the protocol, what are the parameters when you're doing a show or practicing for a show, whether it's the Snowbirds or I think it's CF-18, it's probably pretty much the same. What are the parameters to which you must abide by, saying that if the crowd is there, if we're doing this, then when do you eject? When do you do? I guess this is all pretty rehearsed and ready. Everyone knows this, so it's not a question. If something happens to the airplane, yes, you would know what to do, but I guess there's a protocol, right, already scripted that you know, and you just hinted at this about the crowd. If the crowd is right below us, you need some type of energy or enough energy, or you've got to go at a certain speed to make sure that if anything happens. So all this is scripted, prepared, and practiced beforehand. Is that what we're hearing also?
Yeah, that's it. As far as the technical details, you'd be looking at like a phone book, essentially, of documentation and stuff. But with these air demonstration performances, it was the same case when I was flying the demo on the F-18. You put the program together. It has to be approved by your higher headquarters, by the Air Force, essentially. And then that approval is in conjunction with the restrictions laid out by, the civilian governing bodies, like, the ICAS organization, International Council of Airshows, and they have their Air Boss program that's evolving, and they manage all that. On the F-18 side, a few things. So my limit was 300 feet. So I could not go below 300 feet, and I cannot go closer to the crowd than 500 feet laterally. And I was not able, while aerobatic, to have energy directed at the crowd at any time. So there's a show box, and there's corner markers, and the parametric stuff gets a little technical. But when I'm inside that show box, my energy is away from the crowd or parallel to the crowd, not below 300 feet, and certainly not closer to the crowd than the show line restriction itself. Now, during those demonstrations, there's repositioning, to the sides. There is some times where the aircraft will fly seemingly away from the show area to come back from a different direction and stuff. And while we're doing that, so in my case, as a single ship demonstration, I got to be non-aerobatic. I have to be 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle, were the big ones. And then I would have to be above what's called corner speed. So, over 330 knots at least, to give me an energy situation to manage it. So I had to be high, non-aerobatic, with a safe energy. So,
okay.
Yeah. I can speak to the question as well.
Okay, good.
It was pointed at Kamloops, and I understand. I don't want to just dodge it. So just to be very clear with everyone here, I'm not a qualified incident or aircraft crash investigator, and I'm not authorized at all to comment on the ongoing investigation or any of the circumstances that led to that incident in Kamloops. In the question, though, I heard some hypotheticals, and then the interrogative question I heard is, what am I missing? So just to speak to the question, and sorry, that was from Lee. Was that Lee?
Leigh Schubert.
Leigh Schubert. Okay, so just to address Leigh's question specifically, Leigh, what are you missing? You're missing the same thing that I'm missing. All I know about that incident is what's been released via government press releases up to this point as the investigation's ongoing. So what I'm missing is everything. What was the parametric information of the airframe itself during the incident? What were the technical details of the engine during the incident? What was the status of the air crew on board during the incident? What were the environmental conditions? What was happening in the space around the aircraft before, during, and after the incident? That is a ton of technical and parametric information that I don't have access to, and no one in the public does at this time. So with that said, the flight safety investigation is ongoing. The experts have that information. They're compiling that information, processing it, and assessing it. And once that has been assessed and the cause of the crash is determined, that will be released in a publicly accessible report with those findings. But until that point, the investigation is going to continue, and then they will present their findings once the investigation is complete. Lastly, Sunday, May 17th, 2020, it was a sad day for the RCAF. Captain McDougall, the pilot who was injured in the ejection, is a very good friend of mine. We actually went through pilot training at the same time. We were both in bandit flight in Moose Jaw together, so I've known him for quite a few years. And then Captain Jen Casey, she was the public affairs officer for the F-18 demo at the end of 2017. So I met her at as my season approached the end. We worked together, became good friends. She was an outstanding officer and a good friend. So that was a sad day for the Air Force.
Very sad, yeah. And we did have a few COPA members in BCGA, General Aviation, that went and did a flyby, and it was called Snowbird's Operation, what was it called? Backup, Lauren, it was called?
Backup Inspiration.
Backup Inspiration, yes.
Yeah, I saw some of that on social media.
Yeah, yeah. So a few BCGA and COPA members did that. So yeah, in support. Yeah, it was a sad day. We know that you're all, I mean, highly trained. Everything is there. Unfortunately, I think it was a bird. A bird did something, and I don't want to speculate on anything. Like this could have been done, and this. You guys are so highly trained. I mean, the best trained people in the country that could do these things. We're GA pilots, and we're trained, but the best trained people have done this, and it's unfortunate that yes, there was a death. Because I know the F-18 pilots, most people or most pilots would eject in certain circumstances. Have you ever ejected for some reason? By the way, question like that.
I haven't myself. That's a pretty rare.
Yeah.
A pretty rare course of action. There are some guys. You know, there's a guy I work with regularly. I'm just trying to think. Actually, just going through my mental history here. So there's at least two guys I work with regularly who have ejected in their career, but it's certainly it's not something that's very common.
No.
And again, as far as the Kamloops thing, like I'm at the town of Kamloops too is as an instructor at 419, Kamloops is we call it our home city, essentially. The original CO, you know, Moose Fulton, this is back in World War II. He was from Kamloops. Kamloops has always held 419 as their squadron, which is my current squadron. We've got a 419 F5 at the airport there, and we go there several times a year for certain heritage events. Yeah, so it's that was a terrible day. As far as the incident itself, I just want to be very clear. It would be inappropriate for me to speculate on anything about that incident until the investigation.
And I don't want to get into
random guessing. Like I don't have the information I require. If I did, I wouldn't be authorized. But yeah, there's no information.
The best was done, and the highly trained, everyone was just did their best, and it's just something that happened. And I mean, there's speculation about a bird, so we'll just leave it at that, and we'll wait for the report to come out. So I don't want to go any further on this. If I won't push this. Next question. We'll get to something else. Best and worst moment of a fight for you, and I don't know the person that asked that, but best and worst moment of a flight for you. Which flight?
That's the worst moment of a flight. Okay. Just make sure I'm interpreting the question correctly. So, within any general flight, what's my favorite part and what's my least favorite part? Well, the least favorite part, that one's easy. And it happens every time. And I'm not trying to be poetic or anything, but you can see where I'm going with this. The worst part of every flight is the end of it. You know, when you shut the motors off,
taking your helmet off.
Yeah, you climb out of that machine, and that's the reality that I'm kind of experiencing right now. Make no mistake, I feel like the luckiest guy in the world to have the job I currently have. You know, I've had some great experiences up to this point. I'm teaching our newest fighter pilots and our allies' newest fighter pilots those basic fighter fundamentals. I'm still flying the F-18 a little bit. Like, it's awesome. There were a few trips during pilot training where shutting the engine off and taking your helmet off was not the worst part, because it was a very stressful trip as a student, and you're kind of glad that flight's over. But that by no means was a constant. And after going through pilot training and looking back on those experiences and finding the environment I currently find myself in, the end of each flight is the worst by far. The best part, that depends on the mission set. So, you know, when I was doing the demo, for example, as soon as you got to the end of that taxi clearance, which was sitting on the button of the runway, that was the best part, and that best part continued for the next 17 minutes. The throttles weren't afterburners, you were max performing the aircraft, and I loved every single second of that. On some more tactical sides, we'll have long transits, you know, straight and level flying, which can be less exciting. So sometimes you're just looking forward to the end of that transit or that last tanker bracket prior to the push is the term we use, where you actually go into the tactical maneuvering, training with our tactics, or actually executing those tactics in an operational kind of environment. So yeah, that's how I feel about that.
I can understand you like taking off your helmet and doing this. You're talking about training students. Something I personally am not really aware of, but and I think we've only got Canadians on the call right now. But do you also train foreign students? Because I'll get to, like, the American pilots think they're the best in the world and all that. But do you also train American pilots? Do you do that? I mean, you've been to. I know I read your bio, and I read quite a bit. You've been in Texas. You've been a few places in the States. You've been to the test pilot school and all these things. But you also train. Do you also train American pilots? Do you also train Australian pilots, UK pilots, and other pilots? Do we share our knowledge? How is this all done as part of NATO, and part of NATO's being, I mean, let's not get into politics, but how is this done with NATO, and as we share with our allies?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So there's kind of two dimensions to that answer. One is a program that I'm part of right now, which is called NFTC. So it's NATO Flight Training in Canada. And that program is in Moose Jaw, as well as in Cold Lake at 419 Squadron, where I am. And I'll elaborate on that in a moment. But then the other side to that international training component, separate from NFTC, is a program called NJET, which is Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training, a bit of a cumbersome acronym. And that is hosted at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas. We send a few Canadian students each year who are selected to fly fighters down to North Texas, and they'll get their wings down there, and they'll do their IFF, which is Intro to Fighter Fundamentals, down there. In fact, that's what I did as a student. And as part of that program, we also have instructors down there, Canadians, who go down to Texas on an exchange to teach as a jet instructor for part of that program. So that's how I got my wings, through the U.S. Air Force NJET exchange. And while I was flying down there, there were Germans, Italians, the Spanish Air Force, the Hellenic Air Force, Greece had a component there, the Netherlands. Those were the students I remember training with. I believe there's even other countries involved beyond that. Now, to the original dimension I spoke of, which is NFTC, acronym, NATO Flight Training in Canada. That program starts in Moose Jaw on the Harvard 2. So there's Canadians there, certainly, but then there's, the program's almost 20 years old now, and some countries have been involved. They're not involved at the moment. They may be involved in the future. So there's been fluctuation with participation. But in the past, we've seen the RAF, the Brits. We've seen Hungary, the Hungarian Air Force, Singapore, Germany has had an exchange. Denmark had an exchange, all through NFTC. The last phase of that program, phase 4, is where I currently work as a instructor pilot. That's my primary job on the Hawk aircraft. So at 419, it's really cool. We've got instructors from Germany, we've got instructors from Hungary, we've got instructors from the UK, the Royal Air Force, and we have instructors from Singapore. And there are Canadian students going through that program, but we get students from those other countries as well. And it's a really cool place to work, because to be an instructor on that squadron, I get to talk to these fighter pilots from these other countries, and we discuss, the fighter pilot culture in their respective air forces and how they do business. And you get this really, really interesting sharing of ideas coming together that you don't normally see anywhere else. So it's a very good setup.
Okay, it must be. I mean, you're saying, oh yeah, sharing. It's like all these this is Top Gun school, right? Pretty much Top Gun folks from all over the world, right?
Sure. I'll just say this. Top Gun is a dirty word within the fighter force. Because of because of the movie. Now, when I was a kid, I thought the movie was kind of cool. You had F-14 Tomcats, you had Kenny Loggins, rock and roll. I mean, for a 10-year-old watching that on VHS, it was exciting. But yeah, Top Gun's not a term we use.
Okay, but still,
Probably not as fun, but
okay, but you get it, yeah. You folks are. I mean, it's just a gathering of the top NATO pilots and freedom fighters. Let's call them. Yeah, you would be like the Star Wars freedom fighters or something. Yeah.
sure. But
Do
yeah,
something.
yeah. Now to put 419 Squadron into perspective, the students coming through our squadron, they're not operational fighter pilots. They've gotten their wings on a jet aircraft, and they're doing their introduction to basic fighter pilot course essentially. So I'm an instructor on the Hawk there. We take these students through the syllabus with the intention of when they finish their syllabus at 419, they are prepared to go to their country's frontline fighter, whether it's the F-15, the F-16, or in Canada's case, the F-18. They'll go to that frontline fighter, get checked out, and become operational on that fighter. So we are that stepping stone between wings and operational fighter pilot at 419.
Okay. And it sounds like a bunch of, and I'll speak as a lot of women, and my wife will say, oh yeah, a bunch of alpha males. Are there women in those groups, and how are they being perceived? Because I know we've got a lot of women coming through the ranks of COPA and younger pilots, and I think the future will just be opening up to women. But how is this? I know it's pretty much of a macho world, but how would you say, how do you perceive this, and how do you see that? Are there women in those groups?
Yeah. So the simple answer is there are women. The female gender is, I feel, underrepresented at the moment. There are female students at my squadron right now going through training.
Okay.
There have been, females involved in the past. What I can say, it's certainly not 50-50, but we're seeing a transition. I've talked to a few people about this, and it's kind of interesting. Like a fighter plane is the ultimate equalizer, right? If you're in a BFM, basic fighter maneuver, scenario, two fighter jets fighting each other, dogfighting, it doesn't matter what the gender is sitting in the cockpit. In fact, there's no way for you to even know what the gender is of the other person unless you guys are talking on the radio and you recognize a voice or something like that. It really is the great equalizer. So, there's no gender barriers. However, statistically, although there's not a ton of women going through.
Do you see a few more as the years go by, or is it still very, very low?
It's tough for me to say because I don't have a statistical basis for that comparison. I've been at 419 as an instructor for just under 2 years now, a year and a half-ish kind of thing. So I mean, there's been female fighter pilots on the F-18 in the past. At the moment, there's no female on an operational gun squadron in Canada. But
okay.
Yeah,
we have a lot of younger COPA members and COPA members, female COPA members, and we're trying to bring them on and saying, hey, COPA and aviation is just, because over the years, it's always been like around 6% of all the pilots in the country are female. And it's been like 4, 5, 6, and just hovering about there. Growing a little bit because we're losing some of the male pilots and they're just older and all that, or they're foreign, but the male pilot licenses. And women are just there and growing slowly, and it's just nice to hear that. And I was wondering how it was in the military also, but I think there's room and there's a lot more acceptability, and I think there's openness. I mean, come on, it's not just a male thing. So I'm happy to hear that there's you've seen them and you see that there's a little bit there. It may be growing also, so it's good. We've got other questions. We're over the hour, right, Lauren?
Yeah, we have 3 pretty good questions in the chat. If you don't mind answering a few more, Captain Kutryk.
Yeah, I've got no problem sticking around. I have no time restrictions whatsoever. So
Don't say that.
You're the boss, and
go ahead, Lauren.
I'm happy to stay here.
Okay, great. Well, we've got a question from Julian. He says, how do you like flying the Hornet, and do you think the Super Hornet would be a good replacement?
Yeah, so first question, how do I like flying the Hornet? I love it. Obviously, full disclosure, I have a biased opinion, as I've had some really interesting and rewarding experiences and opportunities with that airframe. The F-18 is, it's a real, it's something else to fly. You know, like I've flown different planes through pilot training, and it's not just the thrust, or it's not just the speed. It's all coming together with its unique flight control system and its angle of attack capabilities and stuff. So, you know, to be able to fly that plane, take that plane to combat, and experience that machine in a combat situation has given me a very, you know, biased and favorable perspective on the airframe. As far as what's going to come after the F-18, I don't know. Those discussions are happening right now with assessments. There's currently 3 aircraft currently being evaluated for an F-18 replacement. You know, Lockheed Martin's in there, Boeing, and then Saab's got their contender as well. It's all over the internet. It is a government decision what happens after the F-18. What I can say to that is Canada's fighter force has some of their top people, you know, contributing their expertise as subject matter experts to those evaluations and assessments. So, you know, as we talk to the government, what is our mission sets going to be in the future? What are we going to need to accomplish? How are we going to accomplish that? And then look at these different options. It's all coming together, and the Air Force is part of that.
So a follow-up aircraft question. John asks, do you have a favorite aircraft to fly in within and outside of your profession? And I'd ask the follow-up question, we know you started with gliders and probably Cessnas. What was the transition up to the CF-18?
Yeah, so to go through my transition of, you know, flight training, first was from formal flight training was the SGS 233 Alpha glider with the Air Cadet program. And then from there, I got my private license on a good old Cessna 172 down at Skywings Aviation at Penhold, not too far from where Rob is sitting right now, I understand. And then through COPA, with the help of the Neil J. Armstrong Scholarship, continued to fly. That was a Piper Cherokee, worked on my commercial license while I was going to university as a civilian. So that's my civilian side. Nothing fancier than a Cessna 172 or a Piper Cherokee. On the military side, the kind of standard flight training syllabus. So all pilots start with phase 1 on the Globe 120, which is a small single engine propeller piston aircraft. I moved on to the Harvard 2, which is a turbine, high performance turbine prop. So tandem seating, ejection seats. It's not a jet, but it is a very high performance aircraft. It feels like you're flying like a Mustang or something. And it has some very impressive performance. From the Harvard 2 training, I was selected for jets and was supposed to fly the Hawk in Moose Jaw, the CT-155. There were some training delays, and a few individuals were selected for NJET, the program I told you about down in Texas. So I never did fly the Hawk in flight training. Ended up going to Texas for the T-38 down there, and from the T-38 went to the F-18. That was my military kind of training ladder as far as airframes go. The word favorite is a dangerous favorite.
Yeah.
I've never flown a plane I didn't like. You know, there's something special about obviously the F-18 has a part of my soul, and it's going to have that chunk of my soul probably for the rest of my life, just because of the experiences I've had with that airframe. The Harvard and Moose Jaw was a blast. You know, it felt like you were flying a World War II warbird. The plane had power, it could climb, it had the maneuverability, and it had those straight wings, which means that you could load that thing up, you know, a 3G or more, and just hold that G on indefinitely. Yeah, like I remember momentarily we talked about 60 and 2 turns in the Harvard, and you do like an inverted 60 and 2. So you're doing negative 2G pushing and inverted. And there's not many airplanes that can do that. So the Harbor 2 was pretty special. But like I said, the word favorite, to actually select one, I mean, we go all the way back. The glider, that airplane has a bit of an emotional connection with me. Just a quick anecdote on the glider, because this cracks me up. I'm still in touch with a lot of people within the RGS system, and because of my own experiences, if I can ever share my story with someone, and maybe inspire them to pursue aviation in general, and maybe even in the Air Force, then that gets me motivated. I was probably an average pilot at best on the glider. Did RGSP, so RGS Prairie Region, got my glider license in 2000 it was in Gimli, Manitoba at the time. And on my final check ride, the CFI, the chief flight instructor at RGSP in 2000, was CIC Officer Major Dean Gilry. And there's a card, and he evaluates all your maneuvers and everything. And I'm just hoping to pass, and I do pass. But one of the comments in the comment section on that card was cadet is way too aggressive on the controls. You're not a fighter pilot, period. And
yes,
I am.
Yes, I am.
Because I used to joke with my friends, like, oh, I'm going to prove him wrong someday. And, I'm probably just an average pilot on the F-18 as well, but it was just funny to have such a comment on a glider evaluation card in 2000. And then to look back on that nostalgically, 20 years later.
He knew somehow, he knew. We have another question. How do you manage work/life when joining the RCAF as an adult with a family? Does joining the RCAF with a CPL/Group 1 IFR help? From Dave.
Sure. So balance is critical, certainly. And that's something that I've had to deal with my entire career. And everyone that I work with is in a similar situation. So how that balance manifests itself really depends on your current unit, location, and job. There's times on an operational squadron where you go on training deployments, and you'll be gone, maybe in California or Florida training with the Americans for 6 weeks or more. Operationally over to Iraq, you're gone for 3 months. Back at home, if everything is all normal and you're running a normal flying program, you go into work around 7:30 in the morning and you're coming home, that evening. But sometimes you're doing a night flying program, so you're going at work at supper time and coming home after midnight. So it actually takes a concerted effort to manage that work life and that personal life. It's something that you realize you have to focus on quite early on. So after a few years in that job, you kind of get somewhat good at it. You're planning your calendar in the future. It's like, okay, the squadron's deploying in February. All right, so from this day in February till this day in March, I am not here, which means that I got to get all this stuff done before we leave. Oh, by the way, maybe we should look at, sorting some of this other stuff out and spending time, visiting mom on the farm and stuff, because you're going to be, out of the country for a bit, stuff like that. But certainly manageable. Yeah.
Awesome. The next question from Adam. Have you or any CF-18 pilot ever got their RWR excited by a hostile/unfriendly system on the ground or air during Operation Impact?
Sure. Sorry, Lauren. I think we skipped one. Not to jump the line, I just don't want to cut. I'm trying to follow along on the right-hand side here. There was a question about joining the RCF with the CPL or IFR tickets, so on and so forth. That might be pertinent if someone's actually looking at applying. So I'll just speak to that very quickly. As far as the enrollment requirements and standards go, the most up-to-date information is going to be at your nearest Canadian Armed Forces recruiting center. So contact those people and they'll tell you. The enrollment plans are often changing dynamically. So, there was a period when you needed a degree to be an officer in the Air Force and needed to be an officer to be a pilot. That has changed. They're accepting certain college programs. They're sponsoring certain college programs. It's always changing. When I went through pilot training, if you had a commercial I don't want to misspeak, this was a little while back, but a commercial multi-engine IFR, I believe, you would actually skip phase 1, Portage La Prairie, on the Grove 120. So did it help to have a commercial multi-IFR? Certainly. It let you go straight to Moose Jaw to the Harvard 2. So that's certainly not a bad thing. But the counter to that, were you at a disadvantage for not having a commercial multi-IFR? Definitely not. I was lucky. I had a commercial, no multi-engine training, no IFR certification when I enrolled in the Air Force. And I don't feel like I was at any kind of disadvantage. More to that point, there's several people I work with currently operational, on the front end of our CF-18 force in Canada, who had no formal aviation experience prior to applying. So they're currently flying the F-18 operationally, and they never had a private license. They never had a glider pilot's license. Some of these friends of mine, they've never even had a flight in a small GA aircraft. Their aviation experience was flying WestJet and Air Canada, sitting in the back essentially, and now they're flying high performance jets. So don't be discouraged.
Wow, that's crazy. Not even having a GA flight.
Yeah, sure. And then I'll just jump in. I'm trying to follow along, but Lauren, interrupt if I hijack your flow here. It was a question about the RWR excited during operations. This will be a pretty short answer. So RWR stands for Radar Warning Receiver. So it's a system on the aircraft that lets us know when different radar systems and threats are looking at our aircraft and possibly threatening or not threatening our aircraft. It's something we train with. It's a very complex system, actually a series of systems coming together. It's something we train with all the time, and it's something that we employ with. Operational security, OPSEC, mandates that I'm really not allowed to say anything else about the system beyond that. So I know, some guys are playing flight simulators and, DCS or whatever, and these systems are replicated in there in one way or another. But as far as what's on the CF-18, I can't say anything else.
Okay. I think Adam had a second question if you scroll all the way down.
Okay, that's talking about electronic warfare platforms such as the Growler. I just want to make sure I'm scrolling all the way down. Is Adam in the chat here?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's right.
Hey, sorry, yes.
Hi,
oh, you had
right here.
you were the call sign question too, right? You got all the good questions. Sure. So again, there's a lot I can't talk about because of operational security restrictions. As far as the tactics and the equipment and stuff we're using on the F-18, our combat capability depends on a lot of classified stuff, obviously, which is the same for every Air Force in the world. Electronic warfare is something near and dear to my heart. I'm a graduate of the RCF's tactical EW course. In 2019, I was the instructional lead on the, we call it the TWIC, Tactical Electronic Warfare Instructor course. So as a fighter electronic warfare instructor, this is something that I'm dealing with all the time. You are correct in your question. We do not have a dedicated platform. We don't fly Growlers or anything equivalent to a Growler in our current inventory. That doesn't mean that we're not working within those dimensions and that mission set. Whenever we deploy operationally, we are working with allies. We're never on our own. And so what that means is, to get to our targets, we're using air-to-air refueling. Sometimes Canadian tankers, sometimes tankers from allies. We're flying with other fighter platforms in the package or in other packages supporting us. Some of these platforms are bombers, some of these platforms are intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance platforms. Some of these platforms are platforms like the Growler. So we do work with these platforms, and it's that kind of team effort that you see in these kind of allied operations. It's never just going to be a few F-18s alone and unafraid. We're going to be working with our allies. We're going to bring what we bring to the fight, and our allies are going to be bringing what they bring to have a comprehensive, presentation of force, essentially, to get that mission accomplished.
Excellent. We don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do want to put a couple people on the spot who sent me last minute questions. I'll start with Thomas. You emailed me a question last minute. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask. And Cam, you had asked me one as well via Instagram if you want to ask that after.
Absolutely. So the question that I had was, what did the aptitude test look like initially when you started your recruitment process? When you found out about like what types that you were going to be eligible to fly, I was just curious about what the aptitude test itself looked like.
Yeah. So just to cage this again, because I don't want to mislead anybody who's interested in applying and considering a career in the RCAF. I applied in 2006. So I don't know what's happening right now with specific application aptitude tests and fitness testing and stuff. But what I am quite certain of is that they have somewhat evolved or changed since 2006. So just kind of frame my response with that understanding in the background. The aptitude test for pilot in 2006 involves some mental math. It involves some spatial visualization problems, some kind of other, cognitive problem-solving stuff where it would describe a situation in text, and you would have to kind of visualize that to determine what the solution was. And that was the initial application at the recruiting center. And then if you get the opportunity for pilot training or and a few other trades, they would send you to Aircrew Selection. And at Aircrew Selection, there's more aptitude testing and some simulator testing and stuff like that. So I'll just take a step back and speak about the recruitment scenario itself. So you put an application in, that application accepted, they're going to do their initial aptitude and testing beyond aptitude at the recruiting center. So it's going to involve some written exams. It's going to involve some kind of fitness test, some kind of medical evaluation. And it's going to involve obviously a review of your resume, your educational background, and likely an interview. So I don't want to talk too much about what happened back when I applied in 2006. What I would say, anyone who's considering applying, first step, go to your recruiting center and just say, I'm interested in applying. How do I get an application in? And then ask all your questions to that recruiter in the recruiting center. Ask specifically, hey, what does the fitness test involve for an initial applicant? And I'm sure the recruiter will tell you exactly. I don't know what it is, but it might involve push-ups or pull-ups or some kind of cardio assessment, step test or something like that. But get that information. Ask about the aptitude test. Say, hey, like, is there mental math? Is there any language skill assessment? What kind of cognitive problems? And whatever the recruiter tells you, take those answers and use that information to prepare and maximize your application. I mean, we live in a pretty insane world now with Google. Whatever you get from the recruiter, for example, go onto Google and say, like, mental math aptitude practice problems, long division, multiplication, addition, subtraction, or whatever the recruiter says. You'll find practice problems to get your head in that space to maximize your performance. Likewise, with the fitness training, whatever they describe as the current initial applicant fitness test, take that information, tailor it to your own fitness training, so that when you do that application fitness test, you're able to max perform your points on that. I know Aircrew Selection has changed quite a bit since I've gone through, but when I did go through, there was it wasn't a simulator. It involved, essentially an instrument cross check where you're looking at different gauges, trying to keep things organized and stuff. And so there wasn't a ton of information, but the information I did had from people who had experienced that or whatever, I took that information. I remember playing like Microsoft Flight Simulator prior to going to Aircrew Selection, and just like full IFR. I don't have any instrument training, but I'm trying to fly a Cessna and NS flight sim with the visuals blacked out. So I'm just doing a cross check to get my my cross check skills and fidelity prepared. And then I remember prior to Aircrew Selection, I took my joystick settings for Microsoft Flight Sim, and I inverted the axes. So if I moved the stick right, it would roll left, vice versa. Same with pitch, reversed it. I just wanted to put myself in the scenario where I have to do some kind of visual, spatial, muscle control to get an effect that is totally foreign and abstract to me. So I'm trying to land a Cessna in Microsoft Flight Sim where up is down, down is up, and left and right is reverse, just to kind of prepare me for that. Talk to the recruiter, get as much information as you can, and then take that information to tailor your application.
Awesome, thank you. Cameron, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So it kind of goes in with one of the questions from earlier with the selection of new fighter jets for Canada. And there's been some discussion about whether or not we would ever really consider a single-engine jet again, and kind of the culture of how fighter pilots think in Canada about a single-engine jet for northern operation versus a twin-engine jet. Do you have any comment on that?
No, not really of value. I mean, an engine is just that. It's part of the airplane. It's something that would factor into the equation of any kind of assessment that you're conducting. But all engines are not equal. The complexity of these engines are incredibly, technical and differentiated. So it would be a gross oversimplification to just say like, okay, one engine equals this and two engines equals that. Like, no, you got to look at what's going on with these engines. You got to look at what's going on with the rest of the aircraft. It gets incredibly complex, certainly beyond my technical and engineering understanding. So, as far as what's going to replace the F-18, obviously, as an officer in the RCAF, I can't state any strong comments on that. But beyond that, inability to state how I feel about a certain aircraft or something, I don't have the technical information on those three separate bids, so I don't know where that's going to go. I do feel the right decision is going to get made. This is a cooperative assessment that's happening between the government of Canada and the RCAF, which is supporting the government of Canada. So they're gonna look at the stuff that has to be assessed, and then they're gonna make the right decision based on that.
Right. Well, we'll all be curious to see if we can just have one more question. Do you have a top flight in your memory or a highlight from your career so far?
Yeah, that's kind of like that favorite airplane question earlier, where there's certainly memorable flights. I feel I don't have any kids, but it's like asking a parent, like, hey, who's your favorite kid? There's something special about every one of them, right? So no, I mean, it's been a few years. I certainly remember my first solo in a glider as an air cadet. Kind of that point when you're in the front seat and you get off the tow plane and you glance over your shoulder and realize like there's no instructor in the back, and like the field where you're supposed to land is like way down there, and you're like, 15 years old, and like, oh my God, what kind of situation did I get myself in? That's certainly memorable. That would extend to probably every airplane I've ever flown. The first time you fly an aircraft solo, as I'm sure everyone in COPA can recognize, that is a special experience and a special feeling. First solo on the Hornet, I certainly remember that. I was down in California, Miramar. We were on a training deployment down in San Diego. Some other memorable flights. The first operational experience in Iraq. That's memorable, obviously, for a lot of reasons. I remember my last flight in the red jet aircraft 734 at the end of the Canada 150 season. And our last show was in a place called Minden, Nevada. So just south of Reno, down in Nevada. And after the show was done, there was a bunch of weather systems moving through. I ended up getting delayed, ended up going into Chicago O'Hare because my primary airport was closed for thunderstorms. So here I am in an F-18 diverting into Chicago O'Hare, which is a substantially busy airport. And this busy airport is now busier than normal because all these aircraft from other airports are diverting into O'Hare for thunderstorms. And those thunderstorms were affecting the weather in O'Hare. There was an American Eagle regional jet in front of me. We're stacked up. I don't know how many aircraft were behind me. And the American Eagle jet goes missed approach. So they're on their instrument approach, and they get down to their minimums and are unable to assess the landing area. So they go missed approach. And I kind of cringed at that, like, oh, please let me see the runway and land off this. I wasn't fuel critical, but I was behind my fuel plan because my primary airport was closed for the thunderstorms and the lightning that they were having. I did not have to go with missed approach, thankfully. Pouring rain, really rough ride in there. Chicago O'Hare, just insane trying to taxi around there. Traffic jams of 787s, 737s and stuff. So that was memorable. But after that, dark and stormy night going into Chicago O'Hare, the next day I fly back to Bagotville, and it was the end of my demo season. So I was going back to the squadron as just a regular fighter pilot. The leaves are starting to turn. There's all these wind turbines on the eastern edge of Quebec up near Bagotville. And it was just one of those kind of really sentimental flights. I canceled my IFR clearance, came back, VFR as the sun was setting. It just, I've been accused of being overly sentimental in the past, but
you should be. You're allowed to be.
Sure. That just is kind of highlighted a point. Ms. Nagel, be careful, because if you ask a fighter pilot, hey, what was your most memorable flight or your favorite experience or whatever, you're going to get a guy talking, and he's just going to keep talking for hours and hours and hours. So those open-ended questions can be somewhat dangerous.
Well, it's certainly not a pain to listen to. I mean, I think we're all a little sentimental when it comes to first flights. That's a common theme in this group.
Sure.
Well, I guess if that's all the questions we have, we'll just say thank you so much for coming. Any presentation that brings out our younger members is great for us because we don't always see them. Thanks for taking so many questions, one in advance and the live ones. I think we all learned a lot today, and this was a lot of fun.
Perfect.
And thank you. I'll have one just as a conclusion. Where do you see yourself? I know you're still in the force and all that, but in 15 years, 20 years, what?
Yeah.
After this, what do you want to do?
Oh boy, Mr. Gervais, you keep the hardest questions for the end, I see. So 20 years in the future, that's tough for me to visualize, because that's kind of it's almost like a lifetime. As far as Air Force
aviation, still be in aviation?
I will certainly be involved with aviation. It's something that I am quite passionate about. It's been part of my entire life since I was growing up, and I will certainly be involved with aviation. Right now, I feel very lucky to be in the position I'm in within the RCAF. So, I'm teaching the newest generation of fighter pilots those new tactics as they transition to their frontline fighters. I'm lucky to be flying, some of the highest performing aircraft in the world, and I hope to stay in that environment. So the way our Air Force works, you get a posting usually every 2 to 3 years. So I'm on a training squadron right now. I may go back to an operational squadron. There's some other opportunities within the Air Force that I may consider pursuing, but I have no intentions of leaving the Air Force. It's given me a lot up to this point, and I see some pretty valuable opportunities in the future. So I look forward to pursuing those.
Okay, but you will stay in the aviation world in some way or another, and
absolutely, absolutely. And I don't have any crystal ball that I can look into the future and see where things are going. But at some point I will leave the Air Force, whether it's compulsory retirement and they kick me out because I'm too old, or I move on to other opportunities, in the distant future, essentially. Yeah. But as I transition into the later years of my life, I enjoy living, in the country. I grew up on a farm. Kind of the dream is to be in the country somewhere with a grass strip, and some kind of tail dragger very nearby. So,
yep. Grassroots aviation. Yep. Okay. Good.
Awesome.
Thank you. That was my last question, Lauren. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, this has been a great promo for the RCAF. If there's any members thinking of applying, I'm sure they're sold now. So we'll just say thank you again, Captain Kutryk, for all your great answers. And thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm sure you learned a lot today. And we will see you next time. Next week, for our next gen members, we're doing an intro to careers in survey flying. So you'll get an email about that soon. So yeah, good night, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Captain Kutryk. Thank you for your time.
thank you for having me. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.